Jeremy, thanks for joining us, and thanks for coming to the convention. We're all excited to. I've met you, so I'm not that excited to meet you again. But
Well, feelings mutual, Harold. Let me tell you.
oh, good. And you're also coming to our convention in November. I'm not sure whether you know that or not, but you are.
Okay. I like how you phrase that. You're a hard man to say no to. I just got to say.
Really, boy, I'll tell you, a pretty incredible lineup of people coming to that November convention already. We haven't opened invitations to the public yet, but amongst the private invitations, it's a pretty impressive crew. And 3-day, November 3 to 5, just they're a quick advertisement because I can. So the convention is coming up. Rob Doan set out some instructions on how to get to the event, where to park, and a little bit about security and what's going on base. So more information will follow, but that was sent to everyone's emails and will be helpful, I think, in at least just getting you on base for those of you that need that help. And then, of course, if anybody has special needs and special access needs, let us know so we can help you with that. We'd like to get on top of that. The other thing is we have a number of events that are set up in tabletop events. So I've been sending links to tabletop events, and there are plenty of events to sign up for. The way the scheduling system works is every event has a block of some time period, 1 hour, 3 hours, 4 hours, and you can't overlap. So Friday, not a big deal. Friday in the morning, not a big deal. So we have the Battleship Cove. Then we have the Battle of Rhode Island, kind of, staff ride, but it's going to be a bunch of lemmings in cars, I think, following each other politely to the different sites. And then, of course, the convention opens, and we'll meet over there on base. So there are too many great events for the amount of time we have, which is a good problem to have. But as you go through the scheduling process, you'll get this gut feeling like, wow, I wish. And I feel it for you and with you. And I know that there are plenty of things I want to do there that I'm not going to have the time to do. So with that said, I want to turn things over to, get your schedules in ASAP, by the way. And the last thing is there are some deadlines. So a couple of weeks before the convention, I have to turn in a list of who's coming to the Battleship Cove tours. And, of course, that one costs a little bit, but it includes a docent tour and of course, your entry into the facility. If I don't have your paid subscription by then for that event, I can't get you on a docent tour. So make sure that you get in early. Very pleased with the sign up so far. We've got over 30 people for both, or almost 30 people for both that and the Battle of Rhode Island, which I'm also looking forward to. But plenty of other people that haven't signed up, and I don't want you to miss those tours. Any questions or thoughts on any of that administrative stuff before we turn it over to the big brain? Now I'm talking about Andrew Buckholz, by the way, Jeremy. So sorry, Andrew. All right. We'll get started. We're all here to listen to Jerry talk about some of his work on something new and interesting. So, Jerry, you have the floor. I might mute myself, or certainly will mute it, but may go on a blank screen for a few minutes. But I am around if you need any assistance.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Harold. And I want to congratulate you on winning the Charlie for South China Sea, which I don't know if you're going to do a tournament over there in Newport, but I know on Discord it looked like you might.
I was thinking.
Congrats. That was wonderful.
You're very kind, and congrats to you, right? Because you and Gina won for Skies Above Britain, I believe, right?
Yeah, that means I only won half of one. You won a whole one.
I don't share very well, so you're kind. Well, that's one of many for you. So very, very impressed and proud of your work. And I love that game because I like shooting down bad guys. and that game is perfect, right? Skies Above the Reich it wasn't for me in that regard, but I love shooting down bad guys. So.
Okay, all righty. And I also want to thank you for organizing this. You're a great people person, and you have a knack for putting on a good convention. And boy, doing it in Newport in that location, holy smokes! So I tip my hat to you, and I'm very appreciative. Okay. So folks, I'm going to grab the screen here. I have a short presentation to present. So what I want to do is, the intention here is to present basic concepts of the intercept system, and then just show very briefly how they're applied in a couple of the mechanisms, and then show how it morphs in the new theater of Pacific Chase, which I'm going to be, it'll be on display, and you can play it over there in Newport in just a month. Okay, so first I'm going to go through concept, then development, application, and then Pacific Chase. I'm starting off with a diagram of American football. And that's because American football is one of my favorite games. It's a wonderful game. I used to play it as a youth, and it has a lot in common with games about naval warfare, especially in World War II, but in other theaters as well. And that's both good and bad. They're both great. I mean, there's a lot of good naval games out there, but they tend to use this model, the American football model, which is a little peculiar. Because basically, what's wrong with that is that in American football, you have assigned vectors. Basically, everybody on the offense is supposed to move and do their job in a certain way. Everybody has their assigned roles, and that can be diagrammed. And as I'm trying to show here on a typical play, you have a pitch to the right. And if it goes very well for the offense, what's going to happen is the running back is going to break free, probably be running down the sidelines, and there'll probably be a cornerback or a safety or somebody back there on the defense who needs to stop him. The ball carrier's blown by everybody else. So now what you have are two vectors. You got two trajectories. The running back is heading for the end zone. Meanwhile, the safety is noticing that, seeing that, can calculate instantly the trajectory and plot his own intercept course. The running back can see that as well. So as the safety is adjusting, the running back might kick in the speed, or maybe change course just a little bit, give him some more room, a little bit away from the sideline so he can juke or whatever. And back and forth, like two dancers watching each other's moves, they can instantly correct. A lot of naval games play this way. So for instance, if we have two task forces like you see here, one is starting to go around the Denmark Strait, the other one's trying to intercept, and most naval games tend to be very incremental. You move maybe one space or two spaces a turn, or one space maybe every two turns. But the point is, you can see each other. You can instantly react. And that isn't really a very good model for nautical operations at the operational scale in World War II, because information isn't like it is on a football field. I mean, on a football field, even people in the stands can see everything instantaneously. So what needs to happen is there has to be a disruption of information. And there are some ways to do this quite well. For instance, a friend of mine, Chris Yannick, who also designs for GMT, if you're familiar with PQ-17 in the Decision at Sea series, he disrupts information by using the old Stratego method, which works quite well. So basically, it's blocks. Although I can see your task force or whatever it might be in that space, I don't know what it is. It might not even be a task force. It might be a dummy. However, there is still a problem there, because I can see exactly where it is. And there's also another problem. It's great that Chris and others have managed to hide the enemy positions. And there's other ways to do this as well. Like I say, a lot of really good games out there on this already. The old Bismarck game, the kids' classic Battleship does this. And the more recent game by VUCA, The Chase of the Bismarck, beautiful, very well executed game, marvelous game. That one just completely hides the enemy position. So you've got two boards, and I can only see my British forces. I can't see your German forces because of that screen. So that's not bad, but it's still not neither Chris's nor the Stratego or Battleship method is perfect. So what I thought I would try to do is try to ameliorate the problems that they don't address. So they both do a good job of hiding the enemy position, but they do a terrible job of hiding friendly positions. Now, the thing is, it's occurred to me since I started this, when I was doing Atlantic Chase, it occurred to me that a lot of folks aren't quite up to speed on how that's a problem. You know, why shouldn't I see my own task forces? I should know where they are. The thing is, you really shouldn't. You should not be able to see the safety or the ball carrier because you don't have that view. So here's an example as to why. So if you've been to London, the Imperial War Museum has a wonderful exhibit of the old map room, which I think they call it Churchill's bunker or something like that. Anyway, it's now a very nice tourist attraction, but they've got some great archives and artifacts down there. For instance, in the chart room, they have charts of the Mediterranean and the Atlantic. And this is what I'm showing you right now, but if you notice, there's all these pinpricks in it. And the thing is, the reason why there's so many pinpricks, and in fact, you can see a triangular patch right here because there's been so many, they had to patch it over so they could put some more pins in there. They weren't just putting pins in. See, they were representing task forces with two pins, and then they drew strings between them. And I'm showing you some yarn, which is part of that same exhibit. And the reason why they were doing this is because back at Admiralty, back in the map room in London, they did not know where their convoys were. They didn't know where their task forces really were. They knew where they started. They knew where they are going or where they've been ordered to go. But at any given moment, whatever information they have back at headquarters was old. Why? Because they're using a wireless technology. They don't have GPS. There's no satellites. And more importantly, the captains, the rear admirals out there on the Atlantic are not so dumb as to constantly radio back their position, because if they did that, their signals would be triangulated upon and they'd be giving that vital information to their enemy. So there's a problem here. The problem is that most naval games will represent task forces as a set of points. And the problem with the point is it just gives too much information. It's absolute information. So really, there's a couple ways to think about this to get around that problem. One is to think geometrically, to expand our geometric repertoire from points and just add a line. And the other is more representational. When we play a naval game, we tend to think, when we look at the board and we look at the task force, we tend to imagine the ocean and ships. And that's also a mistake. So the reason why it's a mistake is because it means that we're dealing with absolute information, or it's opposite, the invisible information. So either, if I'm playing Stratego, I might know that there is a piece right there, but I don't know what it is. And if I'm playing the old game Battleship, I don't know where any of those ships are. The problem is both sides had fairly good information about each other's trajectories. They knew where ships were starting, where they were likely to end up, and fairly easy to draw a line in between. So when the Bismarck, for instance, in 41 was rounding the Denmark Strait, it was doing that because it knew where the convoy lanes were, and it was heading for them. Likewise, for the British, they got word very quickly, even when the Bismarck and the Prince Eugen were in the Kattegat, they got information from observers in Scandinavia that the ship was on its way, that it was moving. And they could also do their own trajectories to have an idea of where that task force was going. So they didn't have complete information. They also weren't completely in the dark. So if we think about information as a spectrum, and I've put some games on there to populate that spectrum, chess and maybe American football are on the absolute end, while Battleship is on the invisible end. I think the battlefield is really in a space in between, where you have some fuzzy information. So the solution that the intercept system that Atlantic Chase and Pacific Chase are trying to develop, or is based on, is not that the game board is representing ocean and ships. Instead, the game board is representing a chart. It's representing the chart back at headquarters. And you've got pins and you've got strings. As back at headquarters, they're trying to keep up with what their own forces are doing, while also trying to isolate or understand exactly where and when the enemy is. So to do this, what's that?
Excuse me, sorry to interrupt. We're not seeing any change of slides. Is there only one slide?
No, there's more. Let me, sorry about that. I thought I was merely changing slides. So let me. So I'm not sure how I can go about changing slides anyway, but.
Barry, do you have these, are you showing us PDFs or PowerPoints?
PDF. Is that why?
And is it a continuous PDF or just different PDFs?
I think what I can do is this. I've got it playing. So maybe I just stop playing and it'll be a lot easier. Thanks for interrupting me, by the way, because I would have gone my merry way, as you noticed.
Good job, Frank. Thank you.
All right, here goes. Let's try this. I might be able to do it this way. All right. Can you see that now with a chart?
Yes.
Okay, this is the chart with all the pins.
Yeah, that worked.
In it. And then there's the string, as you can see. And you also have Gibraltar, Algiers, Oran. Those are port boxes, which I just morphed into Atlantic Chase. So the problem here is the game board representing ocean. Actually, because you didn't even see this. And you didn't see Chris's great game, which has the blocks and you've got dummies and so on. So Stratego model versus the Battleship model, which seem to be the two key models by which we, besides football, by which we model action, nautical action in World War II. Both of those models share some of the same problems, even though they tackle information differently. They're both very incremental. They have to be very, very slow, and you tend to get really long games. And that's also one of the design goals of Atlantic Chase. The intercept system is to try to speed things up a bit, have shorter games. So the problem is too much information. And what I'm contending is that the problem is not just hiding or making fuzzy the enemy position, which is what those other models do very well. The problem is that they don't address what should be fuzziness of our own position. We shouldn't necessarily know in an absolute way where our task force is, because their information is old. And the problem there is points, is geometry. And also the problem is we're not allowing time to enter the model. Time in those games is always real time. And back at headquarters, it's almost never real time. The only time that in World War II that there was absolute certainty and information is when something was going horribly wrong for somebody. A convoy got attacked and thus was signaling their position, asking for help. The Bismarck got attacked or sunk. And those are very discrete moments. So here's that visibility spectrum I was talking about. We have the absolute end on this side. We have the invisible end on that side. I'm suggesting that battlefield historically is actually in the middle, where you have fuzzy information, not complete knowledge and not complete lack of knowledge. So the solution that the system is predicated on is the game board is representing the chart, not the water. Geometry is not just points, it's lines and points. And by doing that, by introducing the line as part of the game's geometry, you invite time into your model. And I think in a fairly simple way. So for instance, instead of those task forces moving little by little, one hex at a time, we just draw a line. So the Bismarck's trying to round the Denmark Strait, and I'm not showing another line here. There should be, say, a line for a convoy going across, convoy lane that Admiral Litchens is going for. And now the British, and what this does is once you have the lines out there, now the British player can try to decide, where do I want to intercept? Instead of this kind of, little by little moving, now it's much faster, but also you're making decisions that are more like the decisions that were historically made. You're charting a course, it's projected, you don't know for sure that the Germans are on that course. You've got assets out there trying to verify it, but you got to get those battleships in motion now. You can't wait for absolute information to start, going to full steam with those battleships and get them out of port. They got to be on the move now. So you get this, you're starting to play this kind of information game. And what you're trying to do is convert that line into a point, because that point is decisive. That point is absolute. And if you can do that before your opponent can do it to you, then you have the advantage. So it gives, initiative to the player who can manage and capitalize upon the information they have. So that's Atlantic Chase. Now, so much for the concept. So now for application. The game basically, on that premise, gives the players a menu of actions. So when you have initiative, you can do whatever actions you want. Trajectory is the one where you draw the lines. But it's really things like naval search and airstrike, and maybe signals action. That is where you can manipulate your opponent's trajectories and whittle them down. So for instance, with the naval search, we have this kind of CRT where you get these kind of strange results. But if you get one of these results, basically what it means is, oh no, I guess I'm talking about time lapse here. So and periodically with all of these, you're going to get some kind of time lapse at the end of your set of initiatives. So, and time lapse just refreshes the picture. But there are more dramatic ways to do this. So let's say there was time lapse, this thing shrinks down, and then you get another trajectory, you extend it, and then your opponent tries to intercept in order to figure out exactly where you are. So this result basically says there's now a hole in your trajectory. I know you're not there. That's what that means, but you can't be over here and over here. You can be on one side or the other. So if you have initiative, you get to choose which side. So it goes away. So basically the trajectory gets smaller and smaller until it's a point. So that's basically how the game is played. So are there any questions about concept or application before I start talking about Pacific Chase? All right. So Pacific Chase, the ambition here is to use exactly the same system, but of course that's not exactly possible because there are some differences in the theater that necessitate some tweaking. For one, the theater is a little bit bigger. I'm not doing the entire Pacific. I'm only doing really half of the action. We have Hawaii down here. We have the Japanese islands just appearing here. We have Australia over here. We have the Aleutians over here. And we have the Solomons over here. So That is the geographic scope. In terms of time, it's going to start in December 41. It's going to end summer, maybe late summer 42. So definitely Midway. That's after Midway, there was a change in Japanese doctrine. So I'm looking at going to the first Solomon Seas battle, maybe in August of 42. But at that point, the Japanese were really operating in a very different way. So I'm not sure I can handle that without a major change to the game. So I'm deliberately targeting carrier raids, the time period of carrier raids and the space of carrier raids. So the Kido Butai will do its thing and then is likely to go off screen in order to mess with the British on the other side of Australia and then come back if certain things happen. So some of the theater differences are scope. I'm going to have to deal with fuel in a little bit more direct way. One of the biggest changes, of course, is that the air assets in the Pacific Theater were in much greater abundance over a target than they were in the Atlantic Theater. That necessitates a change, which I'll explain in just a little bit. But really, the biggest change is the fact that there were continuous ops going on in the Pacific compared to the Atlantic. Now, of course, in the Atlantic, there was also continuous ops. There was really never any lull. However, since the game Atlantic Chase focused on the surface assets, particularly the Kriegsmarine, that very small set of assets were held in port most of the time and sorted out only occasionally. And that meant that for scenarios in the campaign, the structure there attended to that so that there were these gaps. So each scenario, each operation in a campaign was very separate. It's harder to do that here because once, the party was on, once Pearl Harbor happened, there was really no lull. As soon as Nimitz got the job, he got his carriers on the move all the time. And the Japanese were also on the move pretty much continuously. So that presents another problem that has to be dealt with. Okay, so I'll show you the Pearl Harbor scenario. Here's the setup for it. And one of the things that I'm very happy about in the system is that we can make Pearl Harbor actually interesting. Usually Pearl Harbor in a World War II naval Pacific game is just sort of a how-to scenario. It's just sort of, yeah, here it is because you're going to want to see it, but it's a little bit dull. But Pearl Harbor was not dull at the operational scale. There were some nail-biting problems there for the Japanese and for the Americans. So I'm showing you the setup, and this is the setup card right now. So the vignette, I just realized, is kind of backwards for the American. This is actually upside down to what we're seeing here. But basically, we have Pearl Harbor here. So that's Battleship Row right there. The Americans have 3 task forces that are in play at the very start. We've got, I believe that is the Lexington, that is Halsey and the Enterprise. And we have a couple cruisers who are out performing gunnery practice. And then we have the Kido Butai right here. So we're going to, I thought we would start right here. The player will be able to set up 2 hexes away from this point. And just so you can see the various assets that are in play, and I'm not showing you the cruisers and the oilers that are in the Kido Butai, and I'm not showing the cruisers and destroyers and so on that are in Pearl, just the big guys. And we can now sort them in our off-map boxes. So this guy is right here. These guys are here. The Lexington is right here. These guys are here, and these guys are here. So we have the little markings to indicate that. So this is the situation. It's a very interesting one for the Japanese player because historically, this is what they did. They came very close, and then they launched. And they were hoping to find not just Battleship Row, they were hoping also to find the carriers, as we all know. But Japanese doctrine at the time was that the carrier was a support element. It was not this main striking force of the fleet. In fact, even until Midway, it was the battleship fleet was labeled the main force, not the Kido Butai. The Kido Butai was there like the submarines and the cruiser screens. Their job was to thin out the enemy battleships for the decisive battle, which would be battleship against battleship. And of course, as you probably know, in the treaties leading up to the war, Japan was at a disadvantage, which they understood. So their doctrine was to go into that decisive battle whenever and wherever it would be, and they figured it would be near the Philippines, to do it in a situation where they had as many battleships as the enemy. And how would they achieve that? Because the Americans had more, they would do it by airstrikes and torpedoes delivered by either airplanes or submarines or cruisers. And they also practiced night actions with the cruisers and so on. That was the doctrine. So this raid, the intention was, although it'd be great to get those carriers, really the main thing was to knock out the battleships. However, players are players. And players, anybody who's going to play this probably is going to know a lot about the history. And it's going to go, Halsey's task force here with the Enterprise and 3 measly cruisers and the Lexington here with its weak force are going to be very tempting. So why not? I'll get back to that in just a minute. So why not do this instead? And the thing is, the Kido Butai, you've got a wealth of air assets. You could split them up if you wanted to. So that's a problem that this game has to face. Because, with play testers, you just give them this, and I've seen it, they start going after the carriers first. And that's kind of cool, that's kind of fun, but it's not really historical. Nagumo didn't do that. Now, let me go back a bit. So one of the changes, as I said, to the system is that you've got just so many more airplanes over the target. Atlantic Chase can't handle that. The airstrike action is not robust enough to do that. So that is although all the actions are going to be the same, the exception is going to be airstrike. And what I'm doing is I'm replacing it with something that I'm calling air intercept, which then has 2 parts to it. So there's going to be greater complexity in that, unfortunately, because I would like to keep the complexity budget the same. One way I'm trying to do that is take away in other places. One of the other places that I'm doing it, and let me go back to here, is you might notice here that on the map, there's no port boxes. So we don't have, those have gone away. There's no more port boxes. So take that complexity away in order to add some here. Now, the way it's going to work is first you have to make contact, and that is you'll use this table, which if you know Atlantic Chase is very similar to the old airstrike table, except there's no damage here. If you get contact, then you can proceed to the strike. Now, this is where the complexity comes in. What I'm doing is I'm creating a strike value for air bases. And of course, the CVs are traveling air bases. So each full one is going to get 2, and that's Kido Butai with 6 CVs. You have 12. And what you do is you compare your strike value or strike strength to the combined defense strength, which is cap and flak. So just having ships there gives you flak. The port gives you flak. And if there's an air base, that gives you flak. And you compare that in a ratio, and you're either going to either have superiority at 2-to-1, or you're going to have advantage, or you're going to be disadvantaged. And then you're going to roll your 2 dice, no modifiers, and that will give you, at least I don't think there's no, there are no, there's no modifiers. The modifiers happen here. But let's say you roll an 8 and you have superiority, then you get these results. And now the results, this is a damage, this is a sunk, and that's 2 ships sunk, and that's a hit. So it is possible, you notice you get a great result just have an advantage, or superiority 11 or 12, you could sink 4 ships, maybe 5, because that's 2 damages. So it could be, so you can get your Pearl Harbor, you can get Pearl Harbor without any special rules, which is also one of the design goals, because usually Pearl Harbor with an operational game, you have to throw in special rules, trying to avoid that. Okay, now the last thing I want to say about this, which is to go back to this problem, which is probably the biggest problem in operational game, especially with continuous ops. How can you entice the player? How can you incentivize the player to do what Nagumo did and make it seem organic? Make it, don't give them an idiot rule. And the solution for this, I hope, is something called operation panels. This is how it's going to structure the campaign and also the scenarios. So if you notice here in the setup card, it's going to tell you which operation panel to start with. You start with panel number 1. Let me zoom in on the panels. So for each scenario, for each operation in the campaign, you'll have a stack of these things sitting next to the board. I don't know exactly how big they're going to be or what they're going to look like just yet. This is all very playtest, but this is number 1. It tells you we're in December, and it gives you goals. So for the Japanese, you are presented with 2 goals: damage or sink 6 battleships, or instead you can damage or sink a CV. You can choose either one. For the Americans, it's you only have the one goal, which is damage or sink a CV, battle cruiser, or transport. But if you manage to do this, you get a choice. You either get to do this or you get to do this. Now, what are these? These are the panel numbers. So if the Japanese damages or sinks 6 BBs, we're going to flip this panel over to number 2, and now it gives them victory conditions. You can get a major victory here, the big V, by doing this, which is put air bases on Guam and Wake and get everybody back in port, or a minor victory simply by putting all CVs and transports into port. In other words, do what Nagumo did. Basically, what Nagumo did, of course, was first attack Pearl Harbor, and then on the way back, cover the landing on Wake. So that is what this is. So this is very historical. Now notice the Americans could go to 3, or if the Japanese chose not to do that, they chose number 3. And let's say we go past 3 or past 2 and we go to 3. Now the Japanese only have a minor victory condition, but the Americans now have a minor victory condition. And now also, if we're going to, in number 2 or number 3, we also start to get reinforcements, because this is one of the other goals in a lot of games. What bothers me is we often have very scripted reinforcements. It's like you're going to get the Iron Brigade coming in along Emmitsburg Road, or I guess it's Taneytown. No, it was Emmitsburg. No matter what, on July 1st, right, at Gettysburg, no matter what, they're going to come. Maybe there'll be a slight variation, but what happens if the Confederates don't show up? They don't march down the Cashdown Pike. Then maybe they go somewhere else. So what this system is trying to do with these operation panels is not just make the player do this kind of dance with victory conditions, but also make the reinforcements change according to the strategic operational situation. You only get reinforcements if things are going bad. So this can go only as far as number 4. So notice that if we get to number 3, now you either get your small victory or you go after that carrier, mister, and you take us to 4. And notice it's similar down there for the Americans. And in number 4, now we have a campaign victory, which is very unlikely, or we have the small or the big, and the Americans also get small and big. So, and notice there's no other panels being mentioned, so this is the end of it. So it's kind of a branching tree, strategically, operationally, that would end there. All righty. So in summary, Pacific Chase, there are some theater differences. There's going to be some system changes in order to deal with that. All righty. That's all I got. You've been very patient. I appreciate it.
Thanks, Jerry. We'll open it to questions if anybody has any questions or anything they want to discuss with the big brain.
I do have a large hat size, but I assure you, my wife, the last thing she's calling me is the big brain. I'm just going to say.
Well, that's
Very
why
fast.
she's not interviewing. Right?
I have a question.
Yeah.
First of all, I want to say the look of the game is really good. I like the graphics, both the board and the ships, and the other displays, and the way you do your combat results page. Everything is graphical. Looks great, and I also really like the operation panels that you showed at the end. That's a real innovation. It's cool on a number of levels. Like the idea of extending a scenario sort of based on the results of the first card. That's sort of the brainstorm. Like, I haven't seen anything like that. My questions are fairly straightforward, though. The first question I have, and I am familiar with Atlantic Chase, so I'm not sure how you're going to answer this. Is there a time scale in general, or is it just advance in time?
Yeah. That's a great question. And it actually, you're tapping the Achilles heel of the system. No model is perfect, especially if you're trying to, condense something in a 2-hour game. And by the way, I'll have Pacific Chase there in Newport. And, I'm hoping to get a couple copies. I'm probably only going to have enough components for one, but, so you can play it, you can try it. And I'm going to be there Friday and Saturday, but I'm going to the tours on Friday, though. But anyway, to answer your question, the time scale to make this work, you can't be too detailed in a lot of ways. So, for instance, I mentioned Chris Yannick's the decision to see PQ-17, incredible detail in there, fantastic game. I can't do the same thing in this. If I drilled down to the same kind of details that he does, the model breaks down. Because what happens is what can actually happen in the system is you can have a trajectory that you see the player is putting down in their turn. And then at later turn, something else is happening. Well, what happened in that later turn could actually have taken place on the battlefield before the thing that we saw enter the battlefield happened before. So it can mess with time. And that was one of the things years ago I was experimenting with because I thought that was kind of cool. And that is also very historical because you don't necessarily know if you're back at headquarters, you're getting spotty information. And an aircraft, as we know at Midway, the radio went out of one of the cruiser's aircraft. So Nagumo was in the dark about some information, and he got information, but that information was just old. So what happens is, because of the system, because you can mess with that time, we can't have discrete time moments. So I don't know what the time intervals are. Sometimes they're very short, sometimes they're very long. So if we really want to have something that's predictive, the military, of course, needs predictive models. I'm not sure Atlantic Chase, that system it uses, can be that predictive, unless all you need is just maybe, putting young officers in a situation where they have to make decisions. But if you really want to know outcomes, what are the probable outcomes? I'm not sure. That there's just so much fuzziness in this necessarily. I'm not sure I could do better. So no, there isn't a particular increment of time.
Thanks,
Nor can
Jeremy.
there be.
Thanks, Jeremy. Can I ask one more question? I said
Yeah.
I had two. The other one is, first of all, I want to respond to what you said. That amorphous time, it seems to fit in well with your design in terms of the panels and the way the scenarios organically extend and all like that. And I just think it's cool, and I don't think we should worry about it. I think it's maybe tricky to implement in a way that gets it exactly the way you're satisfied. But I think it's a cool concept. I immediately thought of Einstein while you were talking. Not a lot.
Well,
Time is relative.
yeah, exactly. But actually, when I, years ago, when I first pitched this, I used to tell people, okay, so, it's like the line is also space, but it's also time, and there's a point in time. And, I'd get very esoteric, and, the eyelids are starting to go down, and they're like, can I shoot now? Like, can I roll the dice now? So I had to go, okay, that's not the way to go about this.
Einstein said God doesn't roll dice.
Yes.
Anyhow, I'll just ask my other question, which I think is very straightforward. You mentioned a couple of times that in your estimation, the Japanese doctrine changed significantly after Midway. And I would agree to some extent, but I'm interested in what exactly you meant by that.
Yeah. My understanding is that after Midway, the idea that the battleship is going to be the main force and that you put out those carriers to whittle away at your enemy or just wipe them out, that changed. So, for instance, at the Battle of Solomon Sea, we had 2 carriers versus 2 carriers in that situation. The Japanese were very cagey about their carriers in a way that they were not previously. So they did not want to risk those carriers because they had understood at that point, they learned the hard lesson that the main fighting force is the carrier now. And the battleship was fast becoming obsolete. And they, talk about bad timing, because the Musashi was coming online and they were running out of fuel. They couldn't, it would only be a few months before they were in such a bind that they couldn't even send out the Yamato because they didn't have the fuel to do it. It was just basically one large anti-aircraft platform. All you could do with the battleships is either blast the heck out of Henderson Field, or you just sit it back, and try to knock some airplanes out of the sky. That's really all they could do with those ships, because now they had learned the hard way. And the Americans also had this more or less the same doctrine. They were not at the, in December 7th, they were not thinking the aircraft carriers were the main fighting force. And it's not even clear to me that Nimitz understood that either. Although he got his, he paired up his aircraft carriers and kept them moving to keep the Japanese off balance, culminating in the Doolittle raid. But he did that because he had no other assets. He didn't have the battleships, so he couldn't confront the Japanese with battleships. He didn't have them.
Thank you. You answered the question. I agree, and I understand your position, which is to terminate after August or September 1942, so that you don't really need to worry about the change, like and all. So that sounds perfectly reasonable. I definitely agree that at some point in 1942, both sides wised up about the importance of carriers.
Yeah. When do you think it happened?
Excuse me?
When do you think it happened?
Well, I think that Yamamoto had this idea early on, probably influenced by Toronto, the attack by the British on the Italian fleet, although some people disagree with that, like and all. But Yamamoto, he crafted this plan, I guess, with Nagumo. And from the beginning, they had some confidence that a carrier strike at Pearl Harbor would produce results.
Yeah.
And I think Nimitz was only a little behind in terms of converting from a battleship strategy to a aircraft carrier strategy. And that's what makes this war really, really interesting.
Yeah. Oh, yeah, I agree.
Aircraft carriers have the ability to attack without being counterattacked. If the other side has only surface, then the surface side is screwed. They're never going to get in range.
Yeah.
But anyhow, I think the war is a terrifically interesting war. I'm glad to see other approaches. Yours is very original and very innovative, and I'm really interested in finding out more about it. I'll see you at the convention.
Yeah, yeah. Looking forward to it. Thanks.
Jeremy, of course, Leslie is his nom de plume, but you're talking to Frank Davis there. So Frank has designs both with Avalon Hill and SPI,
Okay.
and is working on a Pacific War game right now, which we'll talk about at a Thursday Zoom meeting. And he'll be showing a demo and prototype at the convention. So looking forward
Yeah,
to
looking forward to that. Nice to meet you, Frank.
Nice to meet you, Jeremy.
Yeah, terrific.
We're soul brothers.
Yeah, I think we are. Yeah.
And Mark Herman will be there, so you guys can talk Pacific until the cows come home.
Mark Herman, Mark,
Yeah.
it's not ringing
No,
a bell. I don't know.
He's a designer.
Is a designer really? New guy?
Truth, yeah. Anybody else have any questions for Jeremy?
Yeah, one thing that came to mind for me, Jeremy, you talked about how you're bringing fuel as an aspect here versus Atlantic chase. How are you going to handle that?
Yeah. So fuel fuel is also another Achilles heel of the intercept system. Because what can happen in Atlantic, if you played Atlantic Chase enough, you know that you can get some ridiculous, what feels like ridiculous situations where you've got your battle cruisers out there steaming away like forever, and you're going, how is this even possible? And it's even worse with the British battleships, which were real guzzlers. That was one of the problems that Admiral Tovey had. He couldn't steam up too early to go after the Bismarck, because if he did, he'd be in real trouble. Except for some solitaire scenarios where I could craft things to introduce it just so it gets represented in the game, the actual system doesn't really have it. It just kind of waves its hand magically and says, we're not going to worry about fuel because we have this amorphous time. And that's a problem in the system. I acknowledge that. That is a problem. So the thing is, I'm still all in on the system, though. I don't want to because I kind of feel to do fuel well, you need a different system. So the best I can do is do a kind of patch. And one way to do that, and I have to do it here because the distances are too great. So the way I'm going to try to do that, my working model right now has basically markers that join the task force, which are they represent the Oilers. Originally, actually, for a long time, I had and by the length of your trajectory, but that didn't quite do it. So what this does is instead, it's a design for effect thing where if you have that marker in your task force, that gives your enemy some die roll modifiers when they attack you with an airstrike or try to do an engage, because basically you're slower. And you can't, you have to protect those guys. But there's also advantages. So you get to automatically keep the initiative if you spend your marker. So that's a way for Nagumo to send the Oilers, the tankers back home in order to go, at flank speed and just really knock the crap out of the Americans' Pearl Harbor. It gives you a bonus, but it's also, if you get caught with it, you're in trouble. And then with the operation panels in the last one, for instance, I don't know if you noticed it, I had it on for a very short time. Basically, when that thing comes up, when panel number 4 comes up, there's been so much time now has transpired that if you don't have an Oiler in your task force, that task force goes away. So we're just going to remove it, which also presents some problems, which I have to iron out. This is why we're not on P500 yet. There's some things that I haven't quite ironed out yet, but that's how I'm going about it.
Very cool. Thank you.
Yeah, no, you guys are zooming in on the weak points of the design. You're not supposed to do that,
It is a Zoom meeting. So Jeremy, I have a question. I was talking to Mark Herman about the Pacific, and we were talking about modern combat. So Andy could probably tell us a lot about that. But one of the points that he made that was just so powerful to me was this a geographical point. was just the vast expanse
Yeah.
of space. And you know, I know that at least in the Atlantic, right, we look at shipping lanes as opposed to you don't search everywhere, right?
Right.
But how does that impact the transition from Atlantic Chase to Pacific?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. You know, I think it would impact it more if we were talking about, say, early 19th century, you know, Trafalgar or whatever. You know, interceptions always happen near the coast. Basically, in Pacific Chase, you know, I'm only showing, although there are these vast empty regions between, what tends to happen because of the operation panels and your goals, the action is still happening near where they tend to happen historically, which is at hot spots or, you know, vulnerable points of geography. They're going to happen near, usually with the Pearl Harbor scenario, for instance, where the action really starts swirling is around Wake Island. That's where the battle, you know, it's not so much a Pearl Harbor scenario as it is a Wake Island scenario. And it's not in between either. Because if you're trying to intercept people, you know, trajectories in between, all that you really do is you just whittle down, you just shorten the trajectories, and you wind up at some important geographic point anyway. And it's kind of interesting to see how that usually happens organically. So that's my answer so far. We'll see if that actually pans out. But that is, you know, the large scope is one of the things that has given me pause about trying to use this system in the Pacific. You know, and I'm tempted to take out some of the hexagons in the middle, but that visually looks really wonky, and you wind up having, it's harder to figure out where the trajectories are going through. But so far, I don't think it's necessary. I don't want any special rules for that.
Right. Are you planning on multiple maps?
No, just the one. Oh, well, I'll have some insets, like the Solomons, for instance. I don't know if I'll need an inset for Midway. I might, probably will, but yeah.
Good.
I think your map as it is, at least that first view, really is evocative of the vast expanse of the Pacific. I'd encourage you at all possible to keep the hexes in the center in there, just as a you know, as a reminder of like, hey, anything can happen across this field, and actually having suggestions of pieces of the geography that we do know just being around the edges, I think adds another element and emphasizes that even more, how it's the playing field, that vastness. And having spent many weeks and months on the Pacific myself, you go so long without seeing anything. I don't know that I can think of another Pacific War conflict map that really evokes that distance as much as just this first view, because of the lack of the large patches of geography we do know.
Yeah. And one of the play testers kind of echoed that, and he was an XO on a nuclear submarine, but he works for some defense company now. First time he looked at the map, he said, "It's empty. There's like no terrain."
It's like Tobruk in the Avalon Hill Tobruk, right? No terrain. That's good. Anybody else? Jeremy, excellent as always. Just a pleasure having you, and looking forward to spending some time with you at the SDHist. You said you're coming to the Battleship Cove event?
Yes, absolutely.
Good.
How can I not? I mean, honestly. And then walk the battlefields. Yeah. Heck yeah. Thanks again for organizing this and inviting me. It's a real privilege. Thank you.
Great to have you, and a lot of people, including Andrew, doing a lot of work to make sure everybody's comfortable and happy. So,
well, thank you all.
Very good. All right. Thanks, gang. And next Zoom meeting will be Thursday, and it will be Leslie / Frank talking about Divine Wind.
All right. Looking forward to it.